few years ago, in Ardmore, Oklahoma, in the United States, where I live, there was a young gentleman who was well known in the community to not have a very high IQ. He was tall, he was good looking, he was likable, but he just didn't have the brain power. And I had to tell my four sons, don't just look on the outward appearance. There's much more to an individual than their skin. And I don't know how it is in South Africa, but I know in America that often in the public school system, people get advanced one grade to another, even though they haven't really passed the previous grade. And the thought is that if we leave this boy behind, he's going to lose self-esteem, and he might end up a worse individual. So even though he's not doing well, let's just pass him from one grade to the next. And that's what happened to Les. He had been passed from one grade to the next, failing his math, failing his English, and just attending class some of the time, but not really being successful. After he graduated from high school, he did get married, and he came by our restaurant. We have a vegetarian restaurant in Ardmore, Oklahoma. I don't run the restaurant, but I actually own the building and rent the restaurant out to a church member in the area. And he became interested in a plant-based diet. And he began to adopt this. And soon he became interested in the Word of God as the result of the person that was running the restaurant began to study with him the books of Daniel and Revelation. And he became more interested in academic things as a result of that study than he'd ever been in his entire life. He ended up giving his heart to the Lord and ended up being a converted Seventh-day Adventist Christian. Shortly after that, the owner of the restaurant suggested that he go to a place called Mission College to learn to be a Bible worker and to get grounded. This is in the state of Oregon. And so he attended this accredited school to become a Bible worker. Now again, he hadn't done well in his public school system. Halfway through the school, I was talking to the director of the school because he was wanting me to come out and do a weekend series there at his school. And I said, you have someone in this school that I know from our town in Ardmore, Oklahoma. How's he doing? He said, Les, he's a likable guy, but he says he's not making it. I don't think he's going to pass. He says we're trying to help him, but he just doesn't quite have the ability. And he says we have an accredited program. They have to be able to reach a high academic standard to be able to pass. And I said, well, keep working with him. He does seem to have motivation. He says, yeah, he is motivated. At the end, when I came out for it turns out the weekend that I was there was the graduation weekend, and of course I asked about him at that time, and the director said, not only is he passing, but he's not the bottom of his class. He actually has moved his grades up, and Les is going to be a Bible worker. So a few weeks later, he moved to Denver, Colorado, and he began his first job as a Bible worker. And he was a successful Bible worker. About 2 years after that, he was back at his home. I should mention this. When he became a Seventh-day Adventist, his wife divorced him. And so he was a single man. And he came back to Ardmore, Oklahoma. His parents still live there. And I was happening to eat at that restaurant that lunchtime, and he came up to me and he says, Dr. Nedley, he says, I've really loved being a Bible worker, but I think I could be much more successful if I would be a physician. And I smiled. I said, Les, being a doctor is not for everybody. It is for some people, but it requires an academic rigor that is very, very challenging. And he says, well, I didn't do well in Bible workers school, but then I got my grades up. And he says, I am highly motivated. I said, well, Les, the only way I know that you'd be able to make it through is and even then I don't know, but if you did everything that I recommend on improving your IQ, you might have a chance. He smiled real big and he says, Dr. Nedley, I want to do everything possible to improve my IQ. Tell me how to do it. And so I didn't have time at that time. I had appointments, and so we scheduled a time together where I could go over with him what I covered with you last night and what I'm going to be covering today. And Les took it all in. And the next year, I told him to work on this for a whole year before he tried to work on his pre-med to get into medical school. And he worked this program for an entire year, and then he enrolled at the University of Oklahoma in the hard sciences, general chemistry and biology, and then organic chemistry, getting ready to go to apply to medical school. And I remember the first semester he got a C+ in general chemistry, not near good enough. That semester he got a B- in biology. It was a little bit better in biology. But the next semester after that, he had a B+ in chemistry and an A- in biology. And now he began to take physics and organic, and his mind started to wrap around the subject. And 2 years ago, he took his MCAT examination, and now he is in medical school today. He went from an IQ of 80, which is the bottom 10 percentile of the nation, to an IQ of 120, which is up in the top 10 or 15 percentile of the nation. But his IQ actually was able to improve because he did have EQ, emotional intelligence, with that high motivational component. Now tonight, we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence, but I wanted to talk about a few more things related to IQ here today. First, a little summary of what we talked about last night up on the screen. This is from the pen of Ellen White. The sin of intemperate eating too frequently, too much, and of rich, unwholesome food, destroys the healthy action of the digestive organs, affects the brain, and perverts the judgment, preventing rational, calm, healthy thinking and acting. What part of the brain is she talking about here? It's the frontal lobe. And then her next statement is this, and this is a fruitful source of church trials. So the argument in the church board meeting may not be due to what you think it's due to. It may be due to what the people ate before they got to the board meeting. And thus, you will not be able to come to an agreement since you don't have the empathy, you don't have the principled thinking, you don't have those type of things necessary to be able to see and reason from cause to effect and see the long-term perspective of the decisions that you are making. That she then said this, if you understand how much their habits of diet have to do with their health, their characters, their usefulness in this world, and their eternal destiny. Now I would like to talk about something that is not what you put into your body. We gave the text last night, whatever you eat and whatever you drink and whatever you, what else? Do all to the glory of God. So I'm going to talk about things that affect IQ that is not what you ingest into your body like eating or drinking, but is really more on the doing side of things, or in some cases, the not doing side of things. This is an area that is gaining in popularity throughout the world. In fact, I've noticed since I deal in the realm of depression and anxiety, when people don't respond to medications and counseling, often they're referred to a type of meditation that is an Eastern type of meditation where there's self-hypnosis or there's actually a hypnotherapist involved in the process of trying to make them better. Now, this quote comes from a hypnosis textbook that tries to promote it, but notice what hypnosis does. Hypnosis attempts to cancel out frontal lobe functions. Cancel out what? Frontal lobe functions, and bring people into a trance in which they are highly suggestible. Now, there's many ways in which you can hypnotize somebody, but the textbook also tells you the easiest way to hypnotize somebody. This is most easily accomplished by training the eyes to focus in on one object, the best object being a what? Little flickering light. What will happen then? The person will record information and duties without interpretation or without frontal lobe activity. Now, as the frontal lobe goes down, your analytical area of the brain goes down. You're receiving information but not putting it in the appropriate subsets. And thus, it does have a profound effect on human behavior. It actually decreases the frontal lobe in multiple areas. And we talked last night about all of the problems that come about from compromised frontal lobes. Now, what many people may not realize is they could have a hypnotic instrument in their own home. What trains the eyes to focus in on one object and flickers? What produces that flicker? It's actually the rapid scene of reference change that occurs in entertainment television. You can actually immediately tell, if you turn on your television set, you can look at it for 30 seconds and tell if it's entertainment TV or educational TV. Entertainment TV changes its scene of reference every 3 to 5 seconds on average. In fact, if you were sitting in a dark room and someone was just looking at your face, not at the television, they would see your face constantly changing its hue as a result of the light change that occurs from the rapid scene of reference change. Studies show that when you sit down with an electroencephalogram, EEG, in front of your favorite entertainment television program, within 90 seconds to at most 3 minutes, you will no longer have any beta wave activity. Your frontal lobe will be dormant. You will be in a hypnotic trance. There have been 3,000 books written on the effects of entertainment television in the mind. Over 300 books, or 3,000 studies, 300 books written on it. And there are 17 areas of the frontal lobe of the brain that are adversely affected. Entertainment television increases daydreaming. That's not a good thing. Studies show the more daydreaming you do, this is where you go into a fantasy world when you're at a supermarket line or in a traffic jam, instead of having the mind actually go into something that's useful and practical. Daydreaming increases your risk of Alzheimer's disease significantly, or age-related cognitive decline. It also decreases creative ingenuity. When creativity goes up, daydreaming goes down. And when daydreaming goes up, creativity goes down. We talked about creativity and its associationship with IQ last night. It decreases interest in reading, decreases interest in learning, also a frontal lobe function. It reduces your discernment, your ability to be able to actually sift fact from fiction. Goes down considerably as a result of entertainment television. It trains in non-reaction when you should be reacting. It increases aggressiveness when you should not be reacting. It reduces sensitivity to violence. And on top of it, it's addictive. Just like any frontal lobe suppressant, it is addictive. And studies show that if you're watching entertainment television frequently or entertainment movies frequently, and then you stop viewing it, you will actually have insomnia, headaches, typical withdrawal symptoms that you'll see sometimes as a result of coming off drugs. We used to run 5-day plans to stop smoking in our church. I think we now need to run 5-day plans for stop watching television. Because the world is getting caught up with the fact that entertainment television is a problem, but they don't necessarily know how to get off of it or what to do about it. The more TV adolescents watch, the more likely they are to develop attention and learning problems and to do poorly in school in the long run. The amount of TV kids watched when they were 14 was positively linked with having attention problems later, not doing homework, being bored at school, not finishing high school, and hating school, the researchers found. 14-year-olds who added one more daily hour of TV doubled their risk of academic failure at age 16. The Journal of Pediatrics and the pediatric associations are now well aware of the problems of entertainment television. We used to, in doctors' offices, have big signs, no smoking. Now in pediatrician offices throughout America, they're having big signs, no TV, because of the adverse effects on the mental health and the academic performance of our adolescents. And at the very least, it takes away precious time for family, achievement, and spiritual pursuits. And a lot of people don't realize the vast difference this simple thing of giving up entertainment television can do. A few years ago, it's been a little more than a few years ago, there was a man who grew up in the same city that I grew up in. It turns out we grew up about 15 miles apart from each other, although we didn't know each other, in the big city of Detroit, Michigan. This boy was failing school. He was having all sorts of emotional issues. He was having to be sent to the principal's office frequently, violent tendencies, and F's were showing up on his report card. His mother was poor. His father had left his mother quite a while back and left her dirt poor, raising two boys in downtown Detroit by herself. But she refused to go to the welfare rolls to get enrolled in welfare. Instead, she worked 3 jobs. One of the jobs that she worked at was for wealthy people cleaning their house. And she noticed something when she went into the well-to-do homes. The television was off, and the adolescents in the home were reading interesting books. And that association made her, led her to make a decision to go home and tell her boys, no more entertainment television. In fact, if you want any privileges around here, you are going to have to write 2 book reports for me once a week. Take out interesting books, not fiction books, but interesting educational books from the Detroit Public Library and write 2 book reports a week. And then you will get some privileges. Now, what do you think they thought about their mother at that point? They were pretty negative about her now. What is happening? I'm having trouble at school. Now my mom has wigged out, and what in the world? This isn't happening to my other friends. They're not told they can't watch TV, but yet she was firm about it. What they didn't realize is she could not read herself. But she said she was going to review those book reports, so she would circle in red and she would make some marks on it so that they thought that she was actually reading those book reports. And in 1 year's time, that's all it took. In 1 year's time, Ben Carson went from the bottom of the class to the top of his class. And he said that he no longer hated poverty at that point. Prior to that, he had a visceral hatred for poverty. But he said, I no longer hated it because I knew it was temporary. And not only did he become a physician, but he became a physician that was so creative that he did things that no other physician was able to do. The simple remedy of giving up entertainment television produced a dramatic difference. Now, it wasn't just that. There was another principle that we're going to talk about that Ben Carson also took hold of to get him to the point where not only was he creative, he was the head of the neurosurgery department at Johns Hopkins. He separated those Siamese twins, and he orchestrated that separation with something that I'll show you here near the end. Speaking of entertainment. Back in Ellen White's day, there wasn't entertainment television, but there was the entertaining theater. And she said, there's no influence in our land more powerful to poison the imagination, to destroy religious impressions, and to blunt the relish for the tranquil pleasures and sober realities of life than theatrical amusements. The love for these scenes increases with every indulgence as the desire for intoxicating drink strengthens with its use. The only safe course is to shun the theater, the circus, and every other questionable place of amusement. And that's quite an interesting statement. No influence more powerful. We talked about the effects of diet and drink and what you put into your body, but this is even more important than what you put into your body as far as the adverse effect is concerned. And unfortunately, this is something that a lot of our young people are falling down on. They'll go to our universities and other places and they'll download all of these entertainment movies for free, and they'll be staying up nights watching this stuff, entertaining themselves, and meanwhile, their creativity, their academics, their ability to think outside the box, the rational, calm, healthy thinking and acting goes down to the bottom, and they start to have all sorts of problems that could have been easily preventable. Now, last night, I talked to you about IQ and its relationship to longevity. The higher your IQ, the less likely you are going to die, particularly in the next 10-year period of time where they have done studies in regards to that. And we mentioned one of the reasons is if you have high IQ, you're more likely to learn, retain, and apply knowledge. Even the knowledge that we're giving you today, you're more likely to apply it if you have high IQ. But there's also another factor that's related to longevity that was uncovered just a few years ago in Australia. Compared with adults who watch less than 2 hours of TV a day, those who watch more than 4 hours had a 46% higher risk of death from all causes, 80% higher risk of cardiovascular death during a 6-year study period. Each hour spent sitting in front of the TV per day raised a person's risk of death from cardiovascular disease by 18% and the risk of cancer by 9%. Now, they looked at in this study to see whether it was just the sitting. But it wasn't the sitting because they didn't find adverse effects of sitting and doing homework. They didn't find adverse effects of sitting in an educational environment such as you're sitting in today. But they did find significant adverse health effects of sitting and being entertained, particularly in a frontal lobe suppressant way. And it even has an adverse effect on the immune system. So that's another reason why low IQ is associated with increased risk of death, is simply when the frontal lobe goes down, this is the control center of the entire being, and when that control center goes down, even immunology worsens, and your risk of pneumonia and those type of things, and even cancer goes up. Here's what it says: reading or doing homework is not associated with the risk. It's not the sedentary behavior itself, but something inherent about or associated with television viewing. Alvin Toffler is a media expert that designs commercials in America. He's read a number of books, some of which, if you took communications class in college, you might have read yourself. But he clearly states this: constant stimulation of the senses shuts down the analytical processes. So now you not only have fast-moving images on the screen, but then you have rock and roll set to it. It's called MTV. It will produce a strong suppressant effect on the frontal lobe of the brain. It will shut down the analytical processes. And notice what else he says will happen. And ultimately, it will shut down the ability to face life rationally. This leads to escape techniques that involve withdrawal, apathy, and rejection of disciplined thinking when faced with difficult duties and decisions. When we have difficult duties and decisions, that's when we need to have the disciplined thinking. But instead, escape techniques will come up when we need to have disciplined thinking, and we will instead have withdrawal, apathy, and of course, make the wrong decision. And what sets all of this up? The constant stimulation of the senses. You can see why our societies around us are starting to decline in exponential form, large degree due to the frontal lobe suppressants that are so widely available. The other problem that's happening is something that I have in my own pocket called an iPhone. There's iPads as well. And those, of course, can be used for good things, such as mentioned here. Digital classroom tools like computers, tablets, and smartphones offer exciting opportunities to deepen learning through creativity, collaboration, and connection. But these very devices can also be what to students? Distracting to students. Similarly, parents complain that when students are required to complete homework assignments online, it's a challenge for students to remain on task. They'll be doing their homework, and then all of a sudden some sort of Facebook message will come up, and pretty soon they're off of their homework page, and then pretty soon they're shopping for this or that, and pretty soon they're looking around this way, and their homework isn't being done because of the distractions that are there. Studies show if students don't learn how to concentrate and shut out distractions, research shows they'll have a much harder time succeeding in almost every area of life. The problem is attention is under siege more than ever. The real message is because attention is under siege more than it ever has been in human history, we have more distractions than ever before. We have to be more focused on cultivating the skills of attention. If young students don't build up the neural circuitry that focused attention requires, they could have problems controlling their emotions and being empathetic. The circuitry for paying attention is actually identical in the brain for the circuits for managing distressing emotions. The attentional circuitry needs to have the experience of sustained episodes of concentration, reading the text, understanding and listening to what the teacher is saying in order to build the mental models that create someone who is well educated. One of the researchers behind this is Daniel Goleman. He's written a book recently called Focus, the Hidden Driver of Excellence. But he says one of the keys to success is a digital Sabbath every day, when kids aren't being distracted by devices at all and are engaged in focused learning. He talked about the need to get rid of the internet, computers, tablets, phones for extended periods of time each day where you can spend focused time on learning, and that will actually improve your ability to learn throughout the rest of your life if you have the ability to cut out distractions and have that focused attention that is required. Studies also show the more entertainment screen time, the less sleep. And sleep also has a role in regards to intelligence, particularly not only adequate sleep, but early sleep. This is a graph of melatonin. You can see in yellow, melatonin starts to be produced by the brain significantly in response to darkness or near complete darkness. This is when the lights are out and you're ready to go to bed. If you change your bedtime from 9 p.m. to midnight, however, you will decrease that area under the curve by about 50%. And melatonin is what's needed for you to be able to put in long-term memory what you learned that day so that you can do well on the final and on board exams and those sorts of things. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Certainly healthy and wise. If you have those two things, you have the opportunity, much greater opportunity for wealth. But I can tell you this also positively affected myself. In fact, I shudder as to where I might be, because I was also raised in Detroit in a very adverse neighborhood and adverse environment. My father was an engineer for General Motors, and thus we had to be raised in Detroit, close to where he worked. But fortunately, my father was like Ben Carson's mother. We were the only people on the street that were not raised without television. Actually, my oldest brother was being raised with television, and when he was about 7 years old, he came to my father and he said, "Dad, who is stronger, Superman or Jesus?" And just that question made my father realize, why do I have to have something competing with truth in this household? Let's just get rid of it. And so he got rid of the television. Of course, that was a significant benefit for us to not be raised on that. But later on, when I was in college, my second year of college, I was in pre-med. And in order for me to get all the classes in that I wanted to, that second year I had to take physics for scientists and engineers, organic chemistry, quantitative analysis, and foundations of biology. These were all 4-credit classes, all associated with labs. And so I was having to go to class from 7:30 till noon every day, and then lab from 1 until 5, Monday through Thursday. There'd be a physics lab on Monday and an organic lab on Tuesday. And I remember my pre-med advisor saying, "Neil, if you want to get into medical school, you're probably sabotaging yourself. 2 of these classes would be hard enough. All 4 is almost impossible." But I had read this, the studies on melatonin had not come out yet. But to read and apply inspired material is a significant advantage. And I had read this at the end of my freshman year, this statement, written by Ellen White: "Sleep is worth far more before than after midnight. 2 hours good sleep before 12 o'clock is worth more than 4 hours after 12 o'clock. I was used to going to bed at around 11:30, and I decided to change my bedtime till 9 o'clock or shortly thereafter. I told you my schedule. I had to work from 7 till 9 p.m., but my 9 p.m. quit time was very close to where my dorm room was, and so I could slip into bed shortly after work was over with. And so I went to bed at 9, and I would get up at 3:30 or 4. Now, there's an advantage also of getting up early in a dorm. There's no loud music going on at 4 o'clock in the morning. No one's trying to call you at that time. And so I could start out with my devotions, and my only study time was about 5 in the morning till a little after 6. I would then go on a 3-mile run. I would shower quickly, go to breakfast, and make it to my 7:30 a.m. class. And that semester, I got a 4.0, higher than I had done the previous year with a lot easier classes. And after that, I think I was the only person that went through medical school in my class that never studied after 9 p.m. I'd be saying bye-bye to all of my fellow students at 9 o'clock. We'd have a grueling test the next day, and they had been quizzing me, and they'd say, "Neil, you don't know this any better than we do. You're crazy for going to bed. You need to cram like we do." And I'd say, "Nope, I'm leaving. I'm gone." And then the next day, when they saw the test scores, of course the next day was the test, they wouldn't see it then, but the next week when they'd see that, they would wonder how in the world I was able to pull a far better grade than they had. But it was that melatonin aspect of things that was going on that was that significant advantage. So don't underestimate that. Another advantage is circaseptan rhythm. Now, it turns out our bodies not only have a daily rhythm or circadian rhythm, but they also have a weekly rhythm. In fact, now as a result of what we call chronobiologists, where we graph things over time, 90 days, we will see clear 7-day rhythms occurring in your heart rate, your red blood cells, even your temperature will have a 7-day rhythm. Many immune functions, the rise and fall of dopamine and norepinephrine and cortisol will have 7-day functions. And in fact, this is one of the enigmas. If you start studying chronobiology, the chronobiologists are baffled as to why we have this 7-day rhythm. First, they thought, well, it's because we have 7-day weeks, so we are being controlled by the 7-day week. But then they started finding the same 7-day rhythms in dogs, in flies, and even in plants. And of course, those creatures don't know the difference between Saturn and Santa Claus. No one is telling them about a 7-day week. But that 7-day rhythm is there, and there's nothing in the universe that corresponds to 7 days. The year is not divisible by 7. The solar year is not divisible by 7. The lunar month is not divisible by 7. But yet we see clearly this 7-day rhythm in all of nature. And it turns out, just like our daily rhythm needs to have a sleep time, and there's a better time for sleep, so our weekly rhythm does much better with a rest. This was a study just published last year. This was a study that actually our U.S. government funded. You might have heard about the Blue Zones, National Geographic talking about the Blue Zones, the longest living people on the planet. And the longest living group out of those 3 blue zones that emerged was Seventh-day Adventists in Southern California. In fact, they're the only group that's continuing to increase in longevity, generation after generation. The other blue zones are starting to decrease in longevity. And the U.S. government had a question. Is it their diet and exercise, or might it be Sabbath keeping that's producing some of those physical advantages? And so they spent some money studying this out. And first of all, they had to define Sabbath keeping. And it was negatively defined as not shopping, not reading secular magazines, not watching or listening to news or sports programs, not attending secular concerts or theatrical events, not working or engaging in commercial activities. They also looked at a few other factors as well. And then they took a look at physical and mental health. Here's what they found: avoidance of non-Sabbath activities, performance of spiritual activities, and performance of communal Sabbath activities were all independently associated with improved mental health. So mental health went significantly up. Our ability to cope with stress, with adverse conditions, significantly improved. Emotional intelligence, and to some extent, the general intelligence, or the IQ, as well. Now, interestingly, they found keeping the Sabbath out of social pressure, duty or shame avoidance, or performance of secular activities on the Sabbath, or electively thinking that helping people on the Sabbath was okay, like painting their house, were all independently associated with an actual decrease in mental health. Now, it did show that if you help someone by studying the Bible with them, that's positive. But if you help them with physical labor on the Sabbath, it actually is negatively associated with mental health. So the observance of the Sabbath in those areas emerged as significantly important. Now, what they found is if you have better mental health, you're actually more likely to eat better and to exercise. But they did not find the strong association with physical health. So what they concluded is it's still the diet and exercise and other factors that Adventists are putting into their body and doing with their body that is producing this long longevity. But the Sabbath part certainly helps the mental health, and as a result is an encouragement for them to be on a program that helps the physical health aspect of things. Now, years ago, before these studies ever came out, I told you my father was an engineer for General Motors. He was a non-Seventh-day Adventist engineer for a while. Did not grow up in the church, did not know about it, but after he began to have children, he recognized his need to have a faith in the home. And he began to attend a different church every Sunday, trying to find a church that would teach him the Bible. And many of them mentioned the Bible, but they often, when he would come up to them and say, I really want to know the Bible, they would say, you don't really want to get too close to that book. It could cause some problems. And so he would just leave that church and go to another church. But one particular Saturday night, that's when he would search the paper to find out about the Sunday services. he saw a meeting that was being advertised on Sunday evening about the Sabbath, and he attended that meeting. And they were talking about the Bible Sabbath, which he hadn't really heard about before. And in the middle of the program, he was very impressed with all the Bible that was there, but he thought it's too bad these people don't know about the calendar change, because I think they're off. And right then, a slide came up about the calendar change. And he realized they've done their homework. They know about the calendar change. This is very interesting. So he began to study his Bible more, and he became convicted about the Sabbath. Now, he had his bachelor's in engineering. He was working in the daytime for Douglas Aircraft at that time. And he would go to night school to get his master's in engineering. And his only study day was Sabbath. But when he became convicted about it, he thought, this is what the Bible says. I'm going to give up my study day. And he told his friends that he was studying with on Sabbath, I'm no longer coming. He said, and they said, you're not doing any better than we are. You might as well just resign from engineering school. You're not going to make it. And he almost did at that point. He thought, I better resign. I guess this isn't the Lord's will for me to do that. But then he thought, well, maybe I shouldn't resign. Let's just hang in there. He gave up his one study day on Sabbath, and what do you think happened to his grades? They actually ended up going to the top of the class. Studying less, but yet learning more and performing more. What was happening? Well, studies now show that Sabbath keepers are more highly educated than the general population, even though they refuse to be educated on Sabbath. They actually have higher incomes than the general population, even though they refuse to work on Sabbath. Have higher IQ than non-Sabbath keepers, and they have improved mental and physical health. The Bible says the Sabbath was made for what? It was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a wonderful blessing that helps rejuvenate us physically, mentally, and other ways as well. A couple of years ago, I was in Vail, Colorado, giving a presentation on how to enhance your IQ to a group of secular individuals. These were primarily multimillionaire individuals in the area. They had brought their kids there who they wanted to get into Ivy League schools, and I lectured to them for about an hour. Actually, no, I lectured to them but for about an hour and a half. They were very interested, engaged audience. And I told them that the program was only going to be an hour and a half. So I said, all of you are free to go home. Not one left, and they began to pump me with questions. And I had mentioned about the Sabbath and IQ. And they asked me questions for about 10 minutes in regards to the Sabbath and IQ so they could understand that better. And they could also have their kids potentially understand it to be able to keep the Sabbath for their own mental capacity is concerned. But near the end of that line of questioning, one of the ladies stood up in the front, and she says, for years I've wondered why my brother is far smarter than me and makes a lot more money than I do. She says, I just figured it out tonight. We were both raised as Jews. I don't keep the Sabbath, and he does. And she sat down. There is, of course, advantages to this. Now, I also want to mention the advantage of music. This is something I told you I was going to mention Ben Carson. Ben Carson, by the way, was a Sabbath keeper, so that was an advantage, a second advantage. And the third advantage that he began to participate in was in music. Now, music enters the brain through its emotional regions, which include the temporal lobe and limbic system. This kind of music tends to produce a positive frontal lobe response that positively influences the will, moral worth, and reasoning power. This is more characteristic of what we call traditional classical music that has beautiful melodies and harmonies. That's a picture that I took myself of the Dallas Symphony Christmas concert, where they actually sing a lot of Christmas hymns and those sorts of things that are very frontal lobe enhancing. Study of 6-year-olds found that those who took music lessons for 1 year gained more points on IQ tests compared with their peers not involved in music classes. Benefit was small, but was seen across the spectrum of abilities measured in the tests, including math, language, and spatial skills. Now, any 6-year-old that takes music lessons, in fact, anyone who starts out taking music lessons, they all start out with one genre of music. No matter if they become a rock and roll musician or a heavy metalist, they all start learning classical music. That's how music is taught. And classical music, of course, has the benefits that are mentioned there. Other types of music actually don't have that benefits. In fact, other kinds of music will evoke very little, if any, frontal lobe response, will produce a large emotional response with very little logical or moral interpretation. And that's characterized by the syncopated rock and roll rhythms that is known as popular music today. Popular music will do the same thing that entertainment television does. When you listen to that beat for more than 90 seconds to 3 minutes, you will go into alpha wave rhythm in a hypnotic trance. The frontal lobe begins to be suppressed. It's also addictive music as well, and it's going to adversely affect your ability to learn, retain, and apply knowledge. So upbeat music is not necessarily uplifting music. It can be enjoyable, particularly those who develop a taste for it, but it's not necessarily uplifting. Interestingly, years ago, Ellen White wrote about this. She said, "The things you have described as taking place in Indiana, the Lord had shown me would take place just before the close of probation. Every uncouth thing will be demonstrated. There will be shouting with what? Drums, music, and what else? Dancing. When you hear dance music played to religious words, you're actually hearing the fulfilling of prophecy." She said the senses of rational beings will become so confused that they cannot be trusted to do what? Make right decisions. What area of the brain is she talking about that's going down here? It's the frontal lobe of the brain. But she says when this music is played, it will actually be called the moving of the Holy Spirit. But it's obviously not the Holy Spirit. It's a different spirit that wants to suppress the frontal lobe of the brain but not enhance it. There are 6 characteristics of brains optimizing music. I had the opportunity of studying music therapy under Dr. Juanita McElwain, who started more music therapy programs than anyone else in the country. But this is boiling down a number of studies, not just her studies, but other studies as well. If the music is melodious, it can be simple yet attractive, that's good. Beautiful non-dissonance harmonies. If the harmonies center on dissonance, the 9ths, 11ths, 13ths repeatedly, that will actually not be frontal lobe enhancing. And of course, a lot of the jazz music available today is just dissonant. Even the end of phrases and chords are nothing but dissonant and kind of add a question mark to the situation. And of course, in addition, they tend to have the syncopated rhythms. Straight rhythms or march rhythms are actually healthy. If it makes you want to stand up and march around the room, that's good for the frontal lobe of the brain. If it makes you want to stand up and swing the hips like this, not good for the frontal lobe of the brain. The rhythm needs to be less prominent than the melody and the harmony. If the music tells a story where you can imagine a scene, that's also positive as well. And in addition, you will get more frontal lobe benefit if it's enhanced with reverential music, where it's kind of uplifting you to something greater than yourself. So if it has a strong reverential tone, that will also be frontal lobe enhancing. Now, Ben Carson began to listen to good classical music about the time when he gave up television. And he orchestrated the separation of the Siamese twins. It was a grueling surgery, multiple steps in that surgery, about 72 different steps. And he planned it and orchestrated it time-wise with classical music, so he would know where he was at in the surgery. And it would also enhance his brain. There have been a number of studies showing classical music will enhance athletic performance. It even enhances your ability to shoot a rifle accurately. All sorts of positive studies, not just on mental performance, but athletic performance as well. I think a good verse to remember in regards to music is Philippians 4:8. This is the amplified version that tries to get to the original Greek. But Paul said, "Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is worthy of reverence and is honorable and seemly. And you know, in today's world, you can walk into many religious services and you can't describe their music as reverent. But yet, Paul said, this is what we should be contemplating: whatever is worthy of reverence and is honorable and seemly, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely and lovable, whatever is kind and winsome and gracious. There's a lot of music out there that people like, but it's just not pure or lovely or lovable or kind or winsome or gracious. If there is any virtue, and what else? Excellence. If there is anything worthy of praise, think on and weigh and take account of these things. Fix your minds on them. And that's the purpose of music, is to fix our mind onto something worthy of contemplation. This is why the hymn book, actually a lot of people think it's just music, but in reality it's some of the greatest poetry in the world put to music so that we can remember the poetry themes that are there. Even if you don't sing the hymns, just take your hymnal out and read those beautiful poems, and that can be beneficial as well. This study showed even though you've never been seriously exposed to good music, it will still help you when you are exposed. This was University of Florida, showing that good classical music improves mood and reduces stress. 6 sessions of classical music therapy were held over a 12-week period in 23 to 45-year-olds. These subjects showed improved scores on tests of overall mood, reported feeling less depressed, reported feeling less fatigue, and their cortisol levels improved. As your cortisol level goes down, your memory goes up. And in fact, to keep a young brain in animals, if they want to keep a brain young for many years in that animal, they will actually remove the adrenal gland so that there will be no cortisol there and the brain will stay young and healthy. So let's take care of our frontal lobe. We need to protect it from mechanical injury. That means wearing your seatbelt. If you're going to do something that is at risk, wearing a helmet is critically important. Studies show if you've suffered more than one concussion, it does have an adverse effect in many individuals. One of the reasons why the National Football League, the rates of depression and anxiety and mental health problems are off the scale in those that have had all of those head injuries. Supply it with good oxygen. That means deep breathing, good exercise, give it good nutrition like we talked about last night. Getting adequate sunlight is also important, not only for the vitamin D, but it helps your brain make serotonin, which can help your emotional intelligence. Exercise it just like a muscle. If we don't use it, what's going to happen? We're going to lose it. And there is a good way of exercising the brain, several good ways we'll talk about here before we close. We must control the inputs. Let's not put in things that are going to hypnotize our brain or suppress the frontal lobe. Correct distorted thoughts, we'll talk about that tonight, and prevent or control disease that also affects it. As far as exercise is concerned, I can think of no better way than what the people of Acts did in chapter 17, verse 11. These were more noble than those in Thessalonica in that they received the word with all what? Readiness of mind, and searched the scriptures weekly. You know, would that our people search the scriptures weekly, but here it says they searched the scriptures daily, whether those things were so. In other words, it was an analytical reading of the scripture, seeing what it was saying, comparing scripture with scripture, a positive frontal lobe exercise that can occur in a daily basis in anyone who takes up the task of reading and studying the Bible daily. So I want to ask you here this morning, do you want to be more intelligent? Do you want to be more analytical? Do you want to make better decisions? Do you want to have a greater capacity to empathize with others? Do you want to have better discernment? Greater ability to see into the future? If you have an addiction, do you want to have a greater ability to overcome this? That requires a frontal lobe. And finally, do you want to have greater power to follow your conscience and to be more open and understanding into doing the will of God? If you answer yes to any of those things, I would encourage you to review your weekly and daily habits and see what you can do to change your habits to be consistent and comprehensive in brain enhancement. Remember Daniel chapter 1. Tremendous disappointment in Daniel's life. Taken away by force to a foreign land, and now forced into an academic curriculum that he really would have preferred not to be a part of, and then given food that he would prefer not to eat. And then it says Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not eat the king's meat. And some people say, well, we really don't have the king's meat anymore. But, even in Johannesburg, I thought I saw a Burger King there. And there's all this imperial food, imperial margarine, Dairy Queen. And, of course, there's still that rich food that's out there. But he purposed in his heart that he would change. Actually, the American Medical Association says he proposed the first prospective epidemiological study ever recorded in human history. Made a change and then had a comparison group that didn't make the change. And by the way, the comparison group, it says in the Bible, were those of his own ethnicity, to make it a fair comparison group in regards to how they would look in 10 days. And not only did they look better, they were healthier, but at the end of how many years was the program? 3 years. He then went for the tests. And they found not only him, but every one of the Hebrews who had taken hold of the diet 10 times better, not just 10% better, 10 times better than anyone else in the entire realm academically. God says, Ellen White says this through inspired counsel, "Dear youth, God calls upon you to do a work which through his grace you can do." A lot of people think the health message is just for the older people that are getting ready to have disease. The health message is much more for the younger people than it is the older people. But here's what she says, "Dear youth, God calls upon you to do a work which through his grace you can do. Show a purity of taste, appetite, and habits that bears comparison with whose? With Daniel's. Notice what God will reward you with if you do this. Calm nerves, a clear brain, unimpaired judgment, keen perceptions. 4 things. She says the youth of today whose principles are firm and unwavering will be blessed with health of body, mind, and soul. She goes on to say the Lord has given man capacity for continual improvement and has granted him all possible aid in the work. Through the provisions of divine grace, we may attain almost to the excellence of angels. Quite a statement. We can, even in this fallen, sinful world, obtain almost to the excellence of angels in our mental acuity. And so by coming here to this camp meeting in 2014, you have not only walked into a big room here today, you've walked into the largest room in the world, and that is the room for improvement. And I would encourage each one of you to take advantage of that room for improving. The Apostle Paul says, "I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice." A lot of people think to live a lifestyle such as this is too sacrificial. But wait a minute. What about my R-rated movies that I like? If I give that up, I'm no longer going to enjoy life. What is there going to be to live for? Or what about my favorite caffeine beverage? Or what about this? Or what about that? And that's why Paul says, present your bodies a what type of sacrifice? A living sacrifice. On the front end, it seems sacrificial. But actually, the Lord never asks us to give up anything that's not for our best interest. Our actual enjoyment of life will go up exponentially, as well as our success and our ability to positively influence others. He says, present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God. Some people call this extremism, but what does Paul call it? He says it's your reasonable service. And then he says this, be not conformed to this world. Not conformed to its diet, its culture, its customs, but be ye what? transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And then the wise man stated this, for wisdom is better than rubies. Some of us have desired a lot of rubies, but not a lot of wisdom. And that's because we don't have things in proper perspective. Solomon says if you compare these two, there's one that's far better. If you have the ability for all the money in the world or more wisdom, choose more wisdom. In fact, he says this, all the things that may be desired are not to be compared to it. No matter what your desire is, stack up your desires. Line them up. Maybe your top 10 desires in this world. And wisdom actually is more important than all 10 of those desires. And so, just as Moses and then later Joshua presented the people of God with a decision, you all have a decision to make. Are you going to voluntarily suppress the frontal lobe at the expense of momentary gratification? Or are you going to take hold of the grace of Christ that can bring self-control and choose a lifestyle that is far more pleasing to God and will actually be far more pleasing to you in the long run? I hope you, as I have chosen, to choose God's way. Before we close, sometimes it's important in a presentation like this to have, and I'm sorry for the audio people because this might put a task on them, but it might be good to be able to answer a few questions and answers from last night as well as today. Maybe I can take 4 or 5 questions just to help clarify some things. And if we have a roving microphone, that would be better so it can get on the tape. I know these are being audio taped, I was told this morning. And there might be a microphone here. So if any of you have a desire to ask a question before we close, now's the time to raise your hand. And this gentleman here will bring you the microphone for a question. Okay.
Thank you very much, Doc, for your inspiring presentation. Yeah, indeed, it's true that the world is under siege. I wanted to ask, what's your take about sporting programs on television compared to movies? Are they both devils, like watching a soccer game?
Okay, I'm not sure I heard the word sports.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, watching like a match.
So you're talking about watching sporting events versus entertainment television. Well, there have been some studies. In fact, I would refer you to a book called Lessons from the Locker Room. It's written by a gentleman by the name of Andrew Miracle. He was the son of a football coach in America. And he had always heard, like most of us have heard, that competitive sports builds character. He studied anthropology in college, and he thought, you know what? Instead of us just assuming that this is true, let's prove it. And so he went about and began to study varsity athletic people, at first in high school, then in college, then at a lot of different levels. And what he found out is that competitive sports by no means builds character. It actually exposes it. The more you're involved in competitive sports, the more likely you are to think that cheating or breaking the rules is legitimate. Your emotional intelligence actually goes down. And if you're involved in varsity athletics, you're 5 times more likely to commit a violent crime. Now, in regards to watching other people perform competitive sports, I like to mention it this way. Sometimes there'll be, 50,000 people watching a sporting event. And, you might say soccer. There's 11 people on each side of the field. And so I'll often make this comment when people are there in their television room watching this. I'll say 50,000 individuals badly in need of exercise, watching 22 people badly in need of rest. And I'd much rather, it's not that a pickup game of sports is wrong per se. A pickup game to be able to get good exercise and those type of things can be okay. But when we take it to the excess of the point that we don't even know anyone on that field that's playing, but yet we are so passionately involved in wanting this team to win, I think we're beginning to major in minors and to get things out of perspective. Does it really make a difference on who wins? Well, it might to you, but in reality, in the grand scheme of things, it makes very little difference, and thus it can be problematic in several other ways besides the hypnotic way. So, good question. Thanks for that, because I didn't speak about that. I might mention, if you want to learn more about that, I have a whole chapter on that in our book, Proof Positive, chapter 13. Yes, a question here.
Could you tell us, is there anything good about decaffeinated coffee?
Okay, is there anything good about decaffeinated coffee? Well, less caffeine, obviously. It's called decaffeinated for a reason. However, in decaffeinated coffee, they put tannins in to replace it. And as far as, one of my specialties is gastroenterology. And of course, gastroenterologists will tell people with reflux no caffeine or decaf for the same reason. Tannins will do the same thing that the caffeine does as far as the GI tract. It is superior as far as the brain is concerned, but if you're wanting a beverage that's the best beverage in the world, guess what it is? It actually is water. Water shows to improve executive functions, improve frontal lobe functions when we're well hydrated, and other drinks don't do as well. But if you're wanting something similar to coffee, there are things like Postum and Roma and things that have no tannins in it, and that would be a better way to go. And yes, a question here, and then I think there's one over there and one here, and then we'll close. So 3 more.
Doctor, you talked about watching television. You see a lot of children these days, maybe from the age of 1 onwards, they are sent into creches, and there they are exposed to few songs, rest, eat, watch TV, wake up, watch songs, up to 7, to the age of going into the upper grade, and from there it's academic again. What is it doing to their moral being?
Well, it's not only impairing their moral being by entertainment television, but it's also impairing their academic performance. And this is now irrefutable evidence. It has been studied so many times, so many different ways, that there's no way that anyone can really, that's looked at the science, can disagree with what I'm saying. So in reality, kids need to choose a better way. Now, one thing I might mention, I mentioned how you can tell entertainment television from non-entertainment. But in America, we have a channel that's on cable called C-SPAN. C-SPAN actually is where the senator is up there giving a lecture, and it just has one camera view, and you'll be watching the lecture. And in the physician lounge at the hospital I work at, often the program is on C-SPAN or it's on the news when you watch, when you come in there with that big screen. But you will see something happening when someone is watching C-SPAN that you will never see in entertainment television. The senator will be up there speaking. First of all, it's very unnatural to stare at the set when there's only one camera view. You can only really do that naturally when they're constantly switching the scene of reference. But with one camera view, people are looking around, they're talking, they might be listening to the senator in the background, and they'll be talking among themselves as physicians, and then the senator will say something, and the doctor will stop mid-sentence and say, did you hear what he said? And what else he's been saying is this and this and this, but yet this is so biased. He's not mentioning this. He's not mentioning that. And they'll begin to argue with the senator on the set. What is happening there? The frontal lobe is working in that doctor. He's analyzing what is happening, and he's actually going through a positive frontal lobe exercise, even though he's disagreeing with the senator on the screen. You will never see that in entertainment television. You'll see a speech being made. You'll hear the individual come up and make a speech, and you might vehemently disagree with the contents of that speech, but under the hypnotic trance, you'll be just watching the set, no reaction, and it actually is producing an adverse event. So it's not just television per se. We can use educational TV with very slow scene of reference to help educate our children, but we need to stay away from the entertainment aspect. Yes, I think there were a couple over here.
What I want to ask is water. How much water you must drink, and can you eat how long before meals, or can you drink it in meals, or just on that a little bit.
More about water. Of course, the purpose of water is to stay well hydrated, and studies show you'll have less fatigue, you'll have better frontal lobe function, you'll have less headaches by staying well hydrated. In comparison by drinking water versus juice or milk or any other means of hydration. So water comes out definitely on top. Is there a best time to consume it? Yes, the best time to consume it is in between meals. Usually up to 10 minutes before eating is fine, or up to 20 minutes after eating is fine. But the issue with taking it with meals is that there are 5 things that have to be constant in your stomach before your pylorus relaxes to let the food empty out. And those 5 things are size, osmolarity, pH, and temperature. Those things have to be constant. And there's sensors in the duodenum measuring those things. And when those things are not constant, the pylorus clamps down. If you put water with your meals, it'll actually slow the gastric emptying, causing some more fermentation and those type of issues. And so that's one of the reasons why it's best to consume your water beverage normally at least 20 minutes after you eat. But having said that, it's better to drink it with meals than not at all. So if that's your only choice, still drink it with meals versus not drinking it at all. Okay, and then I think there was one question in the near the back there, and then we can wrap things up.
Could you tell us what is the amount of time that you could let your children watch 3ABN, Hope, and that type of thing to have selective time? Or does that not make any difference? Does your frontal brain be affected by that or not?
Okay, I think the question is, what about having your children watch some but limited amounts of entertainment television? Is that right? Okay, 3ABN or Hope. Well, 3ABN does not have the rapid scene of reference change. You'll notice when people are talking there, they change the scene of reference, but not every 3 to 5 seconds. And in fact, there have been studies done. Why does the frontal lobe shut down with the rapid scene of reference change? One is your frontal lobe is the analytical portion of your brain, and it's impossible for you to completely analyze each scene before the next one comes up. And so the frontal lobe will actually give up in analysis, and that's one of the reasons why it shuts down. If you have the same scene for 20 or 30 seconds, and then you change the scene of reference, the frontal lobe can keep up with that. And so 3ABN is educational TV. It's not entertainment TV, and it will not have an adverse effect. Well, you've been a very attentive group. Good questions, and we might have opportunity for more questions and answers later on with some of the other presentations I'm giving. But let's bow our heads at this time and close. Father in heaven, we thank you that you have indeed fearfully and wonderfully created us with these brains that are capable of so much. And we now thank you that through science and inspiration, we know how we can treat our brains better and how we can be more open to understanding and doing your will. We pray that we will take hold of the message that the Apostle Paul gave us to present our bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto you, which is our reasonable service, and not to be conformed to this world. May you work through us so that we can positively influence others around us towards your throne and your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.